I'm Elizabeth. Since graduating, I've been working at my dad's business. We supply sports gear, anything a gym might need. It's a family affair. Dad started it, and I just kind of slipped into it after school. I didn't mind the numbers or the routine. It paid well, kept me close to family, and honestly, it was manageable. The night I met Harry was during our annual company party. One of those evenings with too much cheap wine and those little sandwiches everyone pretends to enjoy. I was lingering near the buffet, deciding whether to risk the questionable shrimp, when he walked over, plate in hand. He had this easy smile. "Trust me, the shrimp's a risk, but the mini rolls are a safe bet," he said, nudging the plate toward me as he took one. I laughed and followed his advice. "Thanks, I'm Liz, by the way. Harry, I work at the branch across town. Heard a lot about you, the boss's daughter and all." "Hopefully all good things," I replied, trying to sound casual. We moved away from the food, finding quieter spots to chat. Harry was easy to talk to, maybe a bit too smooth, but refreshing. His humor was a mix of sarcasm and wit, and he seemed to have an answer for everything. We talked about all sorts of things: music, movies, places we traveled. He had a way of making the evening fly by, and when he suggested coffee later in the week, I didn't hesitate. We should do this again, without the stale sandwiches and forced small talk. There's a great little cafe downtown, quiet, good for conversation. "Sounds good to me," I agreed, and we exchanged numbers. As he mingled with others, Dad came over, giving me a look of approval. Harry's a good man. Sharp, keeps things running smoothly over at his branch. The rest of the evening passed in a blur of laughter and plans. As I left the party, I felt lighter than I had in months, maybe even excited. That night was the start of everything, both the good and the bad. That first coffee meeting wasn't supposed to turn into anything big. Just coffee, maybe a pastry, and a bit of conversation away from the noise of the corporate party. But it turned into dinner, and before long, it turned into a life together. We got married, surrounded by family and friends who seemed just as caught up in our whirlwind romance as we were. My parents loved Harry from the start. Dad even made him his deputy and eventually promoted him to head of the company. Everything seemed to be falling perfectly into place. After the wedding, I started working from home. I managed the accounts from our kitchen table, surrounded by piles of papers and the hum of daily life. We thought about having kids, really dreamed about it, but life threw us a curveball. Medical reasons, the doctor said, made it unlikely. It was a hard pill to swallow, but Harry never seemed bothered by it. He just kept going, business as usual. 9 years. It feels like a long time when you say it out loud. 9 years of marriage can smooth out the rough spots, or so I thought. But things with Harry had shifted like the slow movement of tectonic plates, until one day, the gap between us was impossible to ignore. Lately, Harry had been coming home late, the scent of cologne lingering on him like a new habit. He brushed past me in the hallway, eyes glued to his phone, fingers tapping out messages I wasn't meant to see. "Who's keeping you so busy?" I'd ask, trying to keep my tone light. "Just work stuff. New contracts, demanding clients," he'd reply without looking up. I nodded, pretending to believe him, but doubt had already taken root, growing with each passing day. The balance at home had shifted too. I was handling the accounts, managing the chores, trying to keep everything running smoothly. But even well-oiled machines break down. One evening, as I was washing dishes, Harry walked in. He glanced at the sink, then at me, shaking his head. "You should wear gloves, Liz. Your hands are starting to look rough," he said, his voice flat. I turned off the tap, drying my hands on a towel. "Maybe you could help out now and then. It's not just my job to clean up." Harry snorted, a harsh sound. I'm busting my ass at work so we don't have to worry about money, and you want me to come home and do dishes? It's called helping, Harry. It's what people who live together do for each other. I shot back, my patience wearing thin. He rolled his eyes, dismissing the conversation with a wave as he headed to the living room. I don't have time for this, Liz. That phrase had become his go-to response. I don't have time. It echoed in the silences that had grown between us, filling them with an emptiness that was hard to ignore. One night, while folding laundry, I tried again. We could hire someone to help around the house. It's not about the money. You said it yourself. Harry looked up from his laptop, irritation creasing his forehead. I've told you before, I don't want strangers in our house. We're not discussing this again. It's like you don't even see how tired I am, I said, the words heavier than the bedspread I was trying to straighten. He snapped his laptop shut. You're tired. Really, Liz? You sit at home all day, and you're tired. And just like that, he was out the door, the sound of it closing behind him like the end of a long argument. Between the endless laundry, cooking, and cleaning, finding time for myself had become a luxury I couldn't afford. My appearance took a backseat, something Harry didn't miss or hesitate to criticize. You really should try to keep up a bit, Liz, he'd say, flipping through channels filled with images of polished actresses and pop stars my age or older. Look at them, they manage to look good. What's your excuse? I sighed, worn out from the same old argument. Harry, those women have teams, stylists, makeup artists, maybe even a plastic surgeon on speed dial. It's not a fair comparison. He scoffed, unimpressed. Excuses, Liz. They take care of themselves. That's the difference. His words cut deep, but what hurt more was the cold, calculating way he sometimes looked at me. Those looks had no warmth, no love, just a harsh judgment, like I was another line in one of my spreadsheets, a list of flaws to be tallied. As weeks turned into months, the distance between Harry and me grew colder than a winter draft. He was home less, and even when he was, it felt like he was miles away. I'd catch him lost in thought, his phone always buzzing quietly beside him. Sometimes he'd grab it so fast you'd think it was about to explode. Late night, I called out as he came in later than usual one evening. He paused, shoulders tense. Yeah, had to smooth over some client issues. You know how it is. I nodded, though he wasn't looking to see it. Something about his tone didn't sit right with me. His words felt too rehearsed, like he had been practicing them on the way home. A few days later, he slipped up. His phone buzzed on the kitchen counter while he was showering. I stared at it, torn. Snooping wasn't right, but the gnawing doubt wouldn't leave me alone. As I stood there, the screen lit up again, a message preview flashing briefly. Can't wait to see you tomorrow, kissed Alice. My heart sank. Who was Alice? I remembered how quickly he'd locked his phone when he noticed me nearby before. I didn't know what to do. Torn between confronting him and digging deeper on my own. That's when I made a decision I never thought I'd make. I called a detective. It felt sneaky, underhanded, but I needed the truth more than I needed to feel good about how I got it. Look, I just want to know what's going on. I think my husband's seeing someone else. I whispered over the phone, feeling like a traitor. The detective was all business. We can handle this discreetly. You'll have answers within a week. I hung up, feeling a mix of relief and dread. Knowing had to be better than wondering, right? For the next few days, I played the part of the clueless wife. Harry's late nights continued, his excuses growing thinner. I smiled, nodded, and waited. The detective's call couldn't come soon enough. The day that changed everything began with a tornado. The air was thick with tension and the ominous buzz of an approaching storm. I heard the tornado sirens in the distance, a wailing reminder that nature was about to unleash its fury. Harry had been on edge all morning, pacing and constantly checking his phone, which seemed odd given the severe weather. Hey, Liz, can you do me a favor? The weather radio's in the barn. I need you to grab it so we can keep track of the storm, Harry said, his voice sharp, more of a command than a request. I grabbed my jacket, feeling a chill that had nothing to do with the weather. The wind was picking up, howling around the corners of the house as I made my way to the barn. The sky was a bruised mix of gray and black, swirling ominously. As I stepped inside, the musty smell of old hay and machine oil hit me. I flicked on the light and started searching for the radio, but something felt wrong. The barn was too quiet. The usual creaks and groans were drowned out by the roar of the wind outside. Suddenly, the door slammed shut behind me. I spun around, heart racing, and tried the handle. It wouldn't budge. "Harry," I yelled, banging on the wood. "This isn't funny. Let me out." Through the crack under the door, I saw his shadow. He was just standing there, not moving, not helping. "Liz, listen." His voice was cold, emotionless. "I locked you in. A powerful tornado is coming. When it hits, the barn will be the first to go." My chariot dropped. "What are you talking about? Why would you do this?" "It's simple. You die in the tornado. It looks like an accident. I inherit everything. And I'm free," he said, each word sharp as a knife. I pounded on the door with both fists, disbelief and fear mixing with each blow. "You can't do this, Harry. Open the door." But his footsteps faded, the crunch of gravel under his boots growing fainter, until only the storm's roar remained. Panic surged as I scrambled around the barn, looking for anything to break the door or signal for help. The realization that Harry had planned this, wanted me gone, was a betrayal that burned hotter than my fear. Then, as the barn began to shudder with the first violent gusts, I heard another sound, barking. Mr. Thompson's dog, a scrappy little beagle named Bandit, was outside, his barks mixed with frantic whines. "Here, I'm in here, Bandit," I screamed, praying his owner wasn't far behind. Moments later, the door burst open, and there was Mr. Thompson, wide-eyed, with Bandit at his heels. "Liz, thank God." I heard Bandit barking and knew something was wrong. He shouted over the wind, grabbing my arm and pulling me into the storm. We ran together toward his house, the tornado sirens wailing a grim soundtrack to our escape. As we reached his porch, I glanced back. The barn was already disappearing into the swirling debris, a casualty of the storm and Harry's cruel plan. Once inside, Mr. Thompson led me to the basement, where the tornado's roar felt a little more distant. He handed me a steaming cup of coffee and tuned the weather radio to the latest updates. The broadcasters were calling it an unexpectedly powerful storm, one that hadn't been anticipated to hit with such force. As I wrapped my hands around the warm mug, Mr. Thompson sat across from me, his eyes filled with concern. "Liz, what happened out there? Why was Bandit barking at the barn?" I took a deep breath, my voice shaky as I started to explain. "Harry, he locked me in there on purpose. Said the tornado would take care of me." Mr. Thompson's eyebrows shot up, his face crinkling in shock. "He did what? That can't be right, Liz." "It's true," I insisted, the reality making my voice firmer. "He told me himself, said after the tornado, he'd be free to do as he pleased." The old man shook his head, disbelief etched in every line of his face. "That's cold, Liz. Real cold, and stupid. Did he really think he'd get away with it?" I shrugged, the absurdity of the situation not lost on me, even through the fear. "I guess he thought the storm would cover it all up, make it look like an accident." Mr. Thompson's face went pale, and he stood abruptly, his chair scraping against the concrete floor. "We need to call the police now." He pulled out his phone, tapping and swiping, but his expression quickly darkened. "No signal. Damn storm knocked out everything. We'll have to wait it out." I nodded, the gravity of the situation settling in. Outside, the wind howled like a wild beast, relentless and furious. Inside, my mind churned with a storm of betrayal and deceit. Mr. Thompson noticed my far-off look and gently placed a hand on my shoulder. We've got a few hours before this lets up, and we can make that call. Then the police will handle Harry. He won't get away with this." His words were meant to reassure me, but all I could manage was a faint smile. How had I spent all these years with a man capable of such cold-blooded calculation? The man I had shared my life with had been planning my death so he could start fresh. The hours crawled by, marked by the steady drip of a leak in the corner of the cellar and the relentless battering of the storm against the house. Mr. Thompson made more coffee, and we sat in silence, listening to the crackle of the radio and the distant rumble of thunder. When we finally emerged from the storm cellar, the world outside looked like it had been turned upside down. Trees were down, houses damaged, and my heart felt heavy as we walked toward what was left of my home. As we approached, I saw a crowd, neighbors, emergency responders, and there, right in the middle, was Harry. He was putting on quite a performance, sobbing and clinging to one of our concerned neighbors, playing the part of the grieving husband. Seeing him like that, pretending to be devastated, sparked a fire inside me. I marched forward, my steps steady despite the soft, muddy ground. "Liz!" Harry's act fell apart as our eyes met. His face drained of color, his fake tears drying up instantly. The crowd turned, gasping as they saw me, very much alive. I didn't stop, walking straight up to him, feeling every eye on us. "What's the matter, Harry? You look like you've seen a ghost," I said, my voice strong and clear, cutting through the murmurs around us. Harry stuttered, his usual smooth demeanor crumbling. "Liz, I thought you were." He couldn't finish, his eyes darting around, searching for any sign of support from our neighbors. "I was in the barn, Harry. Locked in, just like you planned, right?" I pressed on, not giving him a chance to slip out of the truth. He shook his head, a feeble attempt at denial. No, that's not. It was an accident. Locked from the outside, Harry. Mr. Thompson found me. He saved my life." I turned to Mr. Thompson, who nodded and stepped forward to back up my story. "It's true," Mr. Thompson said. "I found her locked in that barn just before it was destroyed. Had to break her out." The crowd's murmurs grew to an uproar. Neighbors exchanged shocked glances, their faces showing disbelief and anger directed at Harry. Seeing their doubt, I pulled out my phone. The detective had sent me proof last night, just before the storm. I had everything now, pictures and messages between Harry and his mistress. "If you need a motive," I said, swiping through my phone to pull up the damning evidence, "here it is." I held up the screen for Harry and anyone close enough to see photos of Harry with another woman, cozy and smiling in a way he hadn't been with me in months. Harry's face shifted from white to red, his anger replacing fear. "You had me followed. You invaded my privacy. That's what you're focusing on." I couldn't believe his audacity. "Not that you tried to kill your wife." A police officer, alerted by a neighbor, stepped forward. He'd seen and heard enough. "Mr. Walters, I'm going to need you to come with me." As the police car drove off, the tension in the crowd eased. Neighbors approached, offering hugs and words of support. My parents pushed through the crowd, Mom in tears, Dad with an arm around her shoulders, both of them pulling me into a tight embrace. "We thought we'd lost you," Mom whispered, holding me close. "I'm okay, Mom," I reassured her, squeezing her back. "I'm okay." The day moved on, and the crowd eventually dispersed. I stood there with Mr. Thompson and my parents, looking at the damage, at the debris that was once my barn, at the life I had almost lost. In the weeks that followed, my life became a different kind of whirlwind, not of debris and storms, but of legal battles, meetings, and long days in courtrooms. Harry's trial was fast-tracked, given the severity of his crime. Each time I sat in that courtroom, I saw a man I no longer recognized. He seemed smaller, trapped by the weight of his own actions. One afternoon, as I was preparing to head to court, my dad stopped by. He had been my anchor through this entire ordeal, never wavering in his support. "Liz, are you ready for today?" he'd asked, his voice steady but his concern clear in his eyes. I nodded, adjusting the scarf around my neck. "I have to be, Dad. This isn't just for me. It's to show him he can't get away with it." The courtroom was packed, the air heavy with the seriousness of the case. As the prosecutor laid out Harry's intentions and actions, each word seemed to hang in the air. When it was my turn to testify, I stood, feeling the weight of every eye in the room. Harry wouldn't meet my gaze as I recounted what happened, his lawyer furiously taking notes as I spoke. The hardest part was reliving the fear, saying it all out loud in a room so quiet you could hear a pin drop. After I spoke, the defense tried to twist the story, suggesting misunderstandings and desperation. But the evidence was clear. The judge's gavel came down with finality. Guilty of attempted murder, the judge declared, his voice firm and unmistakable. The courtroom buzzed with murmurs, a mix of relief and disbelief. As the officers led Harry away, he finally looked at me. There was a plea in his eyes, maybe for forgiveness, maybe for something to cling to from the past. The aftermath of the trial felt like a quieter storm. Dad had removed Harry from the company the day after I was rescued, leaving his position vacant and the office untouched. One evening, as we were closing up, Dad said, "Liz, we need to start looking for someone to fill Harry's role. The company needs a leader." I paused, considering. "Maybe that leader should be me," I suggested, the idea taking shape for the first time. Dad looked surprised, but then his expression softened into a smile. "I think that's a fantastic idea. You've been the backbone of this place for years." Life began to settle into a new normal. I was busier than ever with the company, rebuilding my life piece by piece. The community support was overwhelming. Neighbors and friends constantly checked in, bringing food, flowers, and words of encouragement. After Harry's conviction, the divorce was swift and straightforward. There wasn't much to discuss. The court granted me all his properties due to his deceit and the severity of his betrayal. A few months into my new life as the head of the company, I received an unexpected call. It was Harry's lawyer, sounding overly formal and uncomfortable. "Miss Walters, Harry wants to meet with you. He's requested a visit at the prison," he said. I hesitated, the past briefly clouding my day. "Did he say why?" "He mentioned wanting to apologize, to make amends," the lawyer replied, his tone carefully neutral. I took a deep breath, memories swirling. "Tell him I'll think about it." A week later, I found myself standing outside the prison, the building stark and uninviting. Inside, I went through security checks before being led to a small room with chairs on either side of a glass partition. Harry was already there, looking older, the weight of his guilt evident. He picked up the phone as soon as I sat down. "Liz, thank you for coming," he began, his voice shaky. I picked up the receiver, my grip firm. "Let's skip the pleasantries, Harry. What do you want?" He swallowed, avoiding my eyes. I'm sorry, Liz, for everything. I was hoping you might forgive me, maybe even speak on my behalf for a pardon. Harry, you tried to kill me. You planned it all so you could be with someone else and keep everything we built. You're not asking for forgiveness. You're asking for a favor because you still want the easy way out," I said, keeping my voice steady despite the turmoil inside. I know it's a lot to ask, but I cut him off, needing to end this on my own terms. "No, Harry, I came here for closure, not to offer you absolution. You need to serve your time, just like I had to endure the pain and fear you caused." His face crumpled, and for the first time, he really looked at me. There was desperation, but behind it, I saw the realization that I was no longer the woman he could manipulate. "I can't help you, Harry. I won't," I said firmly, setting down the receiver with a sense of finality. I walked out of that prison feeling lighter than I had in years. It was over. I was free, not just from Harry, but from the past's hold on me.